Welcome to Storming the Field. I'm Steve Bender. It's week 4 of the NFL season, and we've got a hurricane on our hands, a major hurricane pushing through the Gulf. And because of that, it's going to shake up some NFL matchups, but it's also kind of shook up our podcast a little bit. Today, you're going to be hearing just from me, and so we're going to be talking about how this is going to make a big impact for not only the NFL games, but Ian Oliver, he's out in the field. He's in Tampa. And we're going to be talking about how the Bucs, they're going to be hosting the Eagles on Sunday. Will there be any impacts from that? It looks like the Storm will be well ahead of this event. But if there is damage in that area, if there's recovery, we'll be talking about that. Also, just the players themselves, right? Thinking about how practice may be impacted by this. Their family and friends, they live in these communities, right? If they're impacted mentally, where are they heading into this game? We have all of that dialed in. By the way, I encourage you, if you love weather as much as you love sports, always follow us. You can jump over and follow Ian Oliver. He's Ian Oliver WX on social media. He'll be covering Helene and its impacts in Tampa throughout this entire event. It'll be something that you definitely want to check in. I'm not alone today, though. We do have an amazing guest. We have a former NFL athlete, Chris Manno. He's going to be joining us, and he also is a movement specialist, right? So he's going to be talking about how when the weather does impact the game, how these athletes adapt, right? It is all about the training ahead of this event. You train how you practice how you play. It's all intertwined. It's going to be great to talk with Chris. He's going to jump in, but first, you know what we're all about here on Storming the Field. It's all about Roy, that risk of weather impact. Let's go through the slate of games. Let's look at what we're seeing for that initial lineup for week 4. Remember, we have a major hurricane, but that's really down in the southeast ahead of these games. I think for most part, we're looking at a quiet week ahead. So starting off with the Rams versus the Bears, that's going to be in Chicago. You're going to be talking about temperatures, lower 70s, cloudy skies. I think it's a low risk of weather impact. We're going to revisit that game for Bender's best bet. So stay tuned for that. And then we got the red hot Minnesota Vikings. Sam Darnold, come on. Are you kidding me right now? Looking like an MVP candidate. Love seeing that. But the Green Bay Packers, Lambeau Field, looking great right now. Mid-70s, cloudy skies. Will Jordan Love be back, or will Malik still be carrying the rock? The Green Bay Packers have not faltered at all. They've been looking good. That's a great dynamic game. Then we take it to the Broncos, going to MetLife into, again, areas where Aaron Rodgers doing great job. He got his first win last week at MetLife, and they're looking good. They're looking together. How does that all unfold? And then Philadelphia goes down to Tampa. Remember, this is a Sunday 1 o'clock game. We're expecting landfall for Helene on Thursday as a major hurricane in northern Florida. So our big concern with Tampa Bay, maybe not the game itself at Raymond James, but how is practice leading up to this event? Wednesday, we're recording this. Is it throughout the day on Wednesday, Thursday? Are they moving practice? And then again, mentally, where do they stand after a big storm like this? Is it a distraction? Something I'm curious to ask Chris about too, because he trains these athletes, right? And we talk so much about the physicality of football, right? Protecting the players, but oftentimes if your mind's not right, your body's not right. And so you got to think about, how do we eliminate the distractions? Is this something that the team, they start going into more film, or do they address this head on and say, look, we know that people are going to be impacted by this. We are that source of comfort for the community, right? When you've had massive weather events that happen, the community rallies around the team. I'll bring you back to 2005 Hurricane Katrina. You think about what that did to New Orleans and how they rallied around the Saints and ultimately won that Super Bowl. I'm not saying it's going to be to that extent with this Helene, of course, but you're just talking about how weather plays such a big factor beyond just game day itself. All right, let's get into some of the other games that actually could get a little wet, a little bit sloppy out there. The Bengals, talking about sloppy. What kind of start to the season has this been? 0-3. This is a must-win game for Burrow. Man, you're looking at, they're taking on the Carolina Panthers. Now, for the first 2 weeks of the season, I would have told you, okay, this got to be an easy W. Now, they have brought in a new quarterback, and they are looking good. Last week, what a response that they had. And so you're looking in Carolina. This will be in Charlotte. So we're looking at some light showers. That could play a factor. And then we go up towards New England, out towards San Francisco. They're quiet on the West Coast. Another game that we're looking at closely with the impact. Again, we're recording this on Wednesday. As we get closer to Sunday, our models start to tighten up a little bit, and you start to see what's the likelihood of rain actually playing an impact. Right now for the Bills and Baltimore, a massive game right now, a tone setter for the rest of the season. We have a low Rowie impact. That could change if rain starts to push in. Remember, it doesn't mean that, okay, the game's a wash. You got Lamar and you got Josh, both very versatile, both comfortable with the rock in their hand running it. But you also have two powerhouse rushing teams anyways. So they got to lean heavy. I mean, if you're going to put some weight onto the running game, who better than on the shoulders of Derrick Henry? I mean, come on. That man can lift the entire world if he wanted to. But then on the other side, James Cook, he's been solid. So again, I don't think this becomes, okay, Mother Nature rules this game. It just talks about how if you're running heavy, both these teams are ready for that. How does that change your fantasy lineup? How does it change your betting up ahead of this game? Because if you're looking at Josh Allen and the rocket arm he's got, you would want to go maybe for his passing over on attempts or yards. Unless the rain starts playing a factor, then you dial it back. You start leaning into maybe the running attempts and the rush yards for Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. We'll dive more into that. Just want to get you a little taste, a little something of what we're looking at here at Fox Weather. Last game, Tennessee Titans at Miami. I have this on Bender's Best Bets, and it's not much of a weather impact, upper 80s. I don't think. See, works against the Dolphins, because Dolphins, their home field advantage in September is the sweltering heat. You want that to be a 1 o'clock kickoff. You want that heat index over 100, because we know that the visiting sideline is exposed to everything. Well, this game is at 7:30 p.m. on Monday night. So now you've taken away one of those big advantages. Yes, it's still going to be hot, but for Tennessee, I don't think it's going to be enough to put them in the pressure cooker. We'll have more on that. So before we bring in Chris here, I do want to talk about what we've addressed, right? Real quickly. In this pod, you're hearing a lot from me because Ian Oliver is covering Helene, a hurricane that's moving through the Gulf of Mexico. Expected to be a major hurricane, a Cat 3, potentially maybe even a Cat 4. Let's talk about some historical games that have been impacted by major tropical systems. And again, I think this plays a big factor for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so I wanted to use them specifically as the team that's been impacted. Recently, I mentioned what happened with Hurricane Katrina, but the Buccaneers, it hasn't been that long since they've had a game impact. I'll bring it back to 2022, another game that Fox Weather was all over, by the way, another storm. Remember Hurricane Ian? That made, landfall in early October, right? Or late September through early October, those impacts. They had a game, Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Kansas City Chiefs. It was October 2nd, 2022 at Raymond James Stadium. Now, it went and was kicked off on its original date. They didn't move the game, but because it made landfall and it was so devastating, they did have some games where the practice facilities were impacted. Leading up to that game, players were inside during that game instead of being outdoors. Maybe you're doing a little more film coverage on this type of event. And we know these facilities, they're top of the line. So they still are going to get their reps in. But now mentally, what's the weight of that? Because if you think back on Hurricane Ian, Tampa was in the line of fire really until that last moment. And then it took that jog to the east and impacted Fort Myers, right? They took the brunt of that storm. But leading up to that event, how does that weigh on those players? And you had to actually think about a lot of those Buccaneers players, they got moved over to Miami to practice for this game because they thought, okay, Raymond James could be taking a direct hit. Then they moved over. Then you think about fans' attendance. A lot of fans couldn't make it to the game because obviously priorities were on that recovery effort. Ultimately, the Chiefs won 41-31. The NFL's decision to go ahead with that game on its original date was because of the safety of it all. They knew that Raymond James was sturdy and everybody could get to the game safely. That was one game, right? I want to take you to another one real quickly. Dolphins versus the Buccaneers. This was 2017 Hurricane Irma. This was a Cat 5 storm. It did impact Hard Rock, their stadium. It was minimal in its impacts, but because it was a Cat 5 and it was so devastating, they did decide for fan safety and for everybody there to be focused on the priorities of what matters in these moments. They were going to reschedule that game into November. So ultimately, they did play on November 19th. So you're thinking about a full 2 months later that they played that game because of Hurricane Irma. Again, it was because they prioritized the safety and recovery efforts in that situation. You think about this thing was a Cat 5 at one point. And then it became a Cat 3, and it impacted in southwest Florida. By the way, it's not like it made landfall on the eastern side of Florida. It was just south of Naples. And so you're talking about 90 miles away, but they were on the dirty side of this storm, and it was a major impact for Miami Gardens and the Hard Rock Stadium. So much impacts that happen here, and we've dove into some of those historical games, what's been happening, what's expected for week 4. Now I want to get another voice in on this. Somebody who's played in the NFL, somebody who now trains the athletes there. He's a movement specialist. Former NFL athlete and sports media analyst for Valuetainment Sports. It's Chris Manno. Chris, thank you so much for being with us here on Storming the Field pod. Chris, it's great to have your insight. I want to ask you, you just heard me talking about those historical games. For you played at Hofstra, you were on the Chiefs, you were on the Panthers. Was there any big weather game that kind of resonates with you in your career and that you had to make some adjustments for and kind of stands out in your mind?
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me so much. I could have sat down here and listened for another 5 minutes. You crushed it. I think I would say more than anything in the Northeast, we would deal with rain constantly and just cold once we got to like November. As a receiver, that impacts us in a couple of ways. The rain makes the ground mushy, and what a lot of us would do if it got too bad, we would try our best not to because we were comfortable in the cleats that we were in. But every once in a while, it would get so messy out there that it would require us to go from moldeds to like to
the screw-ins.
So screw-ins. So we would take our short cleats in and put some longer ones in. More times than not, it was like the big guys up front that would really have to dig in like that. But in the rare instance that we would have to do that playing on grass, I mean, it was uncomfortable for me because I'm so particular about and so comfortable in my normal gear. You would try to practice in them a little bit during the week, but if it kind of snuck up on us, it was tough, man.
No, it's tough because, you get in those different cleats and, those screw-ins, the reason why, they give you more grip, right? But as an athlete, you're going in and out of those cuts, especially as a receiver. You brought up a great point because we had Melvin Gordon III, a Super Bowl champ, on our first ever podcast. He mentioned that same thing. He said, shout out to the equipment crews because mid-game, they'll bring you new cleats. They'll bring you those screw-ins. But then last week, we had 3-time Super Bowl champ Duron Harmon. He's on the other side of the ball. He was a safety, and he was talking about, you know what? I love it because it limits the offense. So I want to get your insight as a receiver. You know where you're going, though, right? And hey, I'm going to make this cut. I'm doing a quick slant, right? I'm doing an out route. They don't. How does that change what you're doing with that route specifically when we're talking about a rain game?
Well, that's always rain or shine, a major advantage that we have. We have 2 things as receivers. A, I know where I'm going, and B, I'm going forwards and you're going backwards more times than not. So we always have that. But yeah, I always say the ultimate equalizer is weather, right? Because you could be the Kansas City Chiefs or the greatest show on turf Rams and be able to throw the ball all over the field. But in a snow game or a rain game, you almost neutralize what certain guys do well. Tyreek Hill runs a 4.2 in beautiful weather, but when he can't dig into the ground underneath him or there's so much snow that his cleats are packed with it, it makes that impossible for him. I always loved watching Shady McCoy. He's probably one of the greatest bad weather backs. And what was so wonderful about him is he was able to sort of do the same stuff in the snow or the rain up in Philly as he did when it was beautiful out. And I was always like, damn, that's a massive advantage that I never seemed like it bothered Shady like it bothered everybody else.
Yeah, of course.
It's a huge deal.
For everybody wondering, Shady McCoy, Sean McCoy, I agree with you, by the way. He was so agile. He was that back that you could never get a solid hit. You always clipped him. But you mentioned it. In Philly, in the Eagles, they play in all of that nasty weather where it's not even legitimate snow sometimes or rain. It's that in-between, that freezing rain, which is just awful. Somehow he just kept his hips under him, and his feet were moving all different types of directions. He gets you off balance. Before you know it, burning right by you. But that comes back to actually what you do now. You train these athletes. I think it's amazing. I checked out your social media. Some of the stuff you do is just incredible. By the way, Sean, I did some football. I walked on a little bit for UCF, and then I went into athletic training and physical therapy. And you know what was so important when I made that transition was I went from the showboating muscles, Chris, where you're doing bicep curls, to the fundamentals, right? And I was watching yours. It was incredible what you're doing on a balance ball, catching stuff with one hand. Talk about why that's so important, though. It's not just for show. As a receiver, you may never be in your full balance. You have to make it no matter where you are. If it's a diving catch, you're in the rain, you're in the snow, if you can get your hands on it, you got to make the catch.
Absolutely. I mean, every coach that I've ever had has been inordinately hard on me, which kind of pisses you off when it's happening. It does. But in hindsight, you're like, like I train wideouts now, and the rule is generally if you get your fingertips on it, we want you to squeeze it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you want to practice and prep for everything that you're going to see in the games. It's very hard to simulate when the bullets fly, but you do it so many times. There's a quote that I love that says, "Don't practice till you get it right, practice till you can't get it wrong." And if I put myself and my athletes in any possible situation, granted, listen, man, I got to spoil it. The on the stability ball thing, there is no use for that on the football field. It just so happened to look cool, got me some clicks, and it was awesome. But yeah, you want to, like you said, practice and everything, and that's what a good coach will prep us for. I mean, when we would practice for rain games, we were doing it with footballs dunked in buckets of water. Mm-hmm. I would prefer, and myself personally, I actually got some gloves with me just for the instance, but these are the Nike, like the Mana Grip gloves. Okay. They get crazy slick when it rains. Yeah. So I would, if the weather got bad enough, it'd be the only time I'd play without gloves because I knew I was going to body catch the ball more. I knew with a towel I can kind of get these things, get these hands a little tacky, but not inordinately slippery. So that would change for me.
That's incredible.
I wouldn't use gloves in the rain.
That's such great insight, Chris, because oftentimes we see all these one-handed catches now, and you can see a lot of old school guys are like, man, that's not fair. It's all the gloves. But we know that's talent, right? Even if you get your fingers on the ball, you got to squeeze it. You still got to catch it through contact all the time. But think about what you're talking about, the reverse of that, trusting your God-given hands, right? Your own ability and the fact that you're going to adjust from trying to put your mitts on the ball, but put your body behind it so it gives you more of an opportunity. I love it. That's great insight. I want to bring you in on some more of the insights for week 4, right? You heard me go through the lineups, but I kind of leaned in on some games that we're going to talk about the weather impact. So let's get your insight. This is what we call our risk of weather impact. And so let's start out with the Cowboys and Giants. Again, for everybody, we are recording this on Wednesday. This is the Thursday night game. This is a must win, right? A big showdown in the NFC East. Cowboys not doing as good as what they want to do, right? Giants finally getting a win, but you're looking at potentially some rain sweeping through. I don't think it's going to be a total washout. It could even be ahead of the game. But talking about Daniel Jones, right? He hasn't rushed for a touchdown this year, but he's had fumbling problems, right? Then you think about Dak Prescott. He's the highest paid quarterback right before the season. Now they're not performing like they want to. There's that pressure. How does that impact in the locker room? You're talking about from a receiving standpoint. Does CeeDee Lamb come over to Dak and say, hey, look, man, I got you. Just get me the rock? Does Malik Neighbors do the same to Daniel Jones? What is that conversation like? Even though you think, hey, I'd go run heavy maybe if it's raining, but the receivers are still like, you got to feed me. We're the star players here. What do you think on that?
Well, I think the situation is different in both teams, right? Think about the instances. CeeDee Lamb is an established, highly paid kind of. He and Dak have that rapport already, whereas Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors are just sort of building it, but they are definitely building it because Malik Neighbors looks like a force through the first couple of weeks. Yeah. I think he might be the guy who prolongs Daniel Jones' stay in New York, Just feed him the football, let him go do what he does best. I think that's the rain up there, and you know what is kind of like sneaky up there, because I'm from New York, is the wind. That wind is always an issue up there in that stadium. It swirls. It makes it real hard to get the football where you want to. On top of that, that potential water. It's good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I wanted to ask you about that. That's such a great point because wind is that invisible threat, right? You can't see it when you're watching the game. If you're in the game, though, you definitely feel it. As you mentioned, from a receiving standpoint, it is all about that chemistry with the quarterback. Doesn't matter who it is, it's that chemistry. And it's all about timing. A lot of these throws are blind, right? It's that, okay, I know if he's doing a comeback, I'm not waiting for him to fully turn around. I'm waiting for when his back is still to me, but I know he goes 8 yards, he's turning around, I'm going to hit him with it. How does wind change that, though, right? Because the timing subtly does change.
Well, I think I'd even take it a step further, right? When you get to that highest level, a lot of times we don't even see the ball come out, period. So it's not even that he's not fully out of his break. He'll just throw it to a spot and expect that I get there. And, yeah, you see it a lot of times, whether it be the wind or it be the bad footing. You don't get in and out of your breaks as efficiently. That's why it's so important to keep that center of mass down for a skilled player and be able to kind of move properly. Don't waste any movement. And, yeah, I mean, that's something where if you have a quarterback who throws that tight spiral that cuts through the wind, it's that's the day you really lean upon that and hope that that the ball is where you expect it to be. But, yeah, I mean, there's certain places where even the best of rapports, Manning and Harrison or any of these guys, Brady and Edelman, things change, man. The wind pulls that ball. That's why, guys, it's vital to get outside before the game. You'll see the specialists out there kicking before to gauge the wind. How far can I get one from? What is the wind doing? What direction is it moving? And for your skill players, it's vital to get out there prior for that reason. If we're going in this direction, how does the wind impact the ball? If I throw a deep ball, is it going to cut through or is it going to die on me? When I'm returning punts and kickoffs, which is something I always did, I always felt like the wind is something I must know about in advance.
Oh, hey, you did punts and kickoffs, and we're going to get your insight on the new kickoff rule in just a little bit. It's been interesting. Melvin Gordon had a great take. He said maybe they put more running backs back there. Duron Harmon, he had said, forget the kicker. You need another defensive man. Maybe we're going to teach, a safety or something how to kick the ball just so you have somebody back there. I'm going to get your insight. I want to dive into some more of these games. And actually, this is a team that you were a part of, the Panthers, right? And I have to come clean. I thrashed them. I was talking about how bad it was in Charlotte. I was talking about how cheap the tickets were. Andy Dalton shows up, and, man, did he put on a performance. Talk about, what a comeback for that game. I mean, he had 3 touchdowns in that game. They get their first win. You get a sign of life in the city. A lot's going on. And they're taking on the Bengals, where there's already whispers of what's happening right now. Are they going to even make the playoffs 0-3? So I want to get your insight because we've talked about the powerful hurricane Helene. It's going to make landfall. Then it's going to move into the southeast, and then it's going to fall apart. But all of that's going to drift over the mid-Atlantic and get over Charlotte as another wet mess. Rain's not equal, Chris. When we talk about a rain shower in Florida or the Carolinas, it's different than the freezing rain up north or the rain out west, which evaporates. This is going to be that thick, heavy rain that limits visibility. It makes it very wet out there. I want to just get your insight on the Panthers locker room, by the way, with Andy Dalton coming in, at least for 1 week, righting the ship. Now you got some confidence.
Right.
And you want to keep that momentum, right? And you don't want Mother Nature to slow you down. You don't want the rain to cause another headache. What do you think is going to be happening with that game? I think, you do have Chuba Hubbard. He was phenomenal, right? He showed out. Do you lean a little bit more into the run game, you think, there? Or what's your take on your old team Panthers?
Well, it sort of reminds me, like the whole situation with Andy sort of reminds me of the Joe Flacco thing from last year.
Great point.
Right?
Great point.
I think I'm probably pretty skewed on my opinion of this. I'm a big proponent of not putting your young quarterback in if you don't have to right away. I look at some of the guys in the league now that had that luxury of sitting. I know this has been a big topic lately, but look, Pat's on a short list, the greatest to ever do it in Kansas City. He had the ability to sit behind Alex Smith and learn stuff, right? Looking at Aaron Rodgers up in New York now. Look at Jordan Love now in Green Bay.
Yeah.
These are quarterbacks that thrive after being able – it's very difficult when you have to try to maximize the years that you have a quarterback before he gets paid to try to pay everybody else. But if you ask an organization like the Packers or the Chiefs if they'd make that trade again, you don't get to capitalize on Pat's rookie year or Aaron Rodgers' rookie year, but you get that extended greatness. I think I'd do that. And seeing Bryce down there in
Carolina,
in
yeah.
just watching Andy come in. I'm not. I don't think this is a death sentence by any means for the young quarterback in Carolina right now.
Yeah.
But that's what you expect from a guy who's been in the league 14 years. Come in, settle the locker room down, and yeah, now he's been in Cincinnati obviously for a million years, so he's seen that terrible Ohio weather. So I think if anybody's more equipped to deal with what could potentially be a ton of rain down there, it's probably Andy Dalton, right?
I love your analysis, by the way. I totally agree with you. I felt bad for Bryce as much as I was being critical of it. You could just see his confidence was taken away from him, right? And so what you need right now is that chance to sit back, right, and take in what Andy Dalton's doing. And Andy Dalton's a great one to learn from. Like you said, 14 years, he shows you what that confidence brings. And I love Bryce's response. Last week, he didn't hide in the shadows. He waited to give every single player a high five. That shows you an amazing type of work ethic and mentality. I agree with you. It's not the last we've seen of Bryce Young. I think this actually strengthens him. My concerns on the other side of the ball, Joe Burrow. I mean, the Bengals have been putting up numbers, points this year, but just can't they can't close out the game, right? They can't do enough. And you talk about a rookie quarterback, man, last week, Jaden Daniels just could unstoppable. So Bengals have a lot to answer to. And I think, Joe Burrow would love nothing more than for this rain to get out of the way so he could just connect with Jamar Chase and silence the noise. I want to bring you into the last big game that's going to be impacted. And this is not necessarily, Chris, something that's going to be the day of. I think we're going to be talking about the Buccaneers and the Eagles, right? What's so important about this game is what's happening right now. We're recording this on Wednesday. Thursday's landfall day, and it's hitting your community. I want to get your insight because oftentimes when we talk about risk of weather impact, it's the day of because we're trying to help you with your fantasy lineup. We're trying to talk about sports betting. We're trying to give you the analysis beyond what you'd get anywhere else here at Fox Weather. But there's some times where big weather events happen days before, and it still resonates for you when you're training these athletes or even when you were playing. When you have a distraction on, outside the field, how do you mentally prepare for something like this? Because for me, I'll tell you what, growing up with sports, it was everything that balanced out the rest of my life. It was what I could count on, no matter whatever traumatic experience that I went through in my life. I had that. That was where I could release from everything else, and you had to be in the moment. Is that what you kind of find when you're training these guys or when you're playing yourself in a game like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what separates the pros from everybody else is you really do have to immerse yourself in your craft to be that great at it, right? I remember myself particularly, I lost my father. And the only time I wasn't thinking about losing my father was when I was on the field for 2 hours. That was my sanctuary, man. You think about some of those great games. I think Brett Favre right away on Monday Night Football, right? He lost his father, I think, on Sunday, played on Monday and threw 5 touchdowns and then got off the field and just, everything, then you have to deal with the reality of what you're dealing with. Obviously, you spoke earlier about Hurricane Katrina and the way it was a rallying point for New Orleans. I had a teammate who was a rookie on that team, Marcus Colston, wound up being a stud receiver for the Saints for a long time. And yeah, man, that really galvanized the community. It gave the young players like Reggie and Marcus a chance to really integrate themselves with the people there and build a love amongst yourselves in there. And it brings a team closer. You hope it doesn't directly impact you. I think about a time in 2009 where the Dallas Cowboys practice bubble was hit by like a terrible rain. I'm not sure if you recall that, but 12 people within the organization injured, one pretty extreme. So it wound up something like that could be definitely a distraction. Thankfully, the grounds crews and everything do a phenomenal job these days where I don't imagine the field will be in too bad a shape if it doesn't happen day of. They're usually able to kind of pull it together and make the field, that's something these guys are better at than anybody else in the world. But yeah, you hope it doesn't affect your team individually or a player individually where, God forbid, somebody in the family is hurt by this, loses a home or something. But yeah, otherwise, man, I think it's just immerse yourself in what you're doing and get away from those distractions for a couple hours.
Yeah, and I think, as you had mentioned with the Saints, right, and how they rallied around, or the New Orleans region and all of Louisiana rallied around the Saints, this could be the similar type of scenario with the Buccaneers, right? They show promise. Baker Mayfield has been looking good. Last week was rough. This could be that time where they show up for the community. And that actually brings us into another segment that we do here. It's called Fortune Forecasting. It's all about betting, right? And we're going to bring in Bender's best bets. And one of the games I have is the Bucs over the Eagles for multiple factors. I think this galvanizes the Buccaneers. I think this puts it into perspective of what they mean to the community. I think a lot of people are going to find some comfort, a sense of normalcy, a sense of togetherness on Sunday because of what they're able to witness there, right? They're going to be going through a lot of heartache potentially in the days leading up to this. Then they get to see their friends, their family, and everybody and talk about what the Bucs are going to do. I also think that because the Eagles and all of their injuries right now, it's just too much to overcome. I got the Bucs over the Eagles. Another game I've got is the Tennessee Titans over the Dolphins. I think, again, similar setup here. I think Tennessee, it's just been so tough. Of course, because of Will Levis. You're thinking about he's been a stud, but at times he makes that bonehead error. The Dolphins, though, have been floundering ever since, sadly, what's happened with Tua. And so I think the Tennessee Titans are going to come down there. They're going to get that momentum. And then I also think my final best bet, these are all money line, by the way. I'm just going with what's the favored games. You're looking at the Rams over the Bears. I think Caleb Williams, as much as he's been showing flashes, he's also shown that he's a rookie. And I think you've talked about this, where he's been put in a tough situation. He's got a lot of studs around him, right? But at the same time, he's had to try to overcome a lot in just a short window of time. There is a difference between college and the NFL, and you learn that real quickly. I think Matthew Stafford has shown what a veteran quarterback can do with what they pulled off over the 49ers. I did not expect that. That was actually one of my Bender's best bets that busted last week because of what the Rams were able to pull off. So that's my bets, right? And I want to get your insight on if you think any of those, if you think I'm wrong, which, by the way, I haven't been doing very, very well so far, Chris, or if there's any other games that you're kind of looking at where you'd kind of favor another. There's a team that you're saying, hey, this is where I'd like lean into.
Well, I find that Bucs-Eagles game you talked about super interesting for two reasons, right? Mm-hmm. First, Baker Mayfield, if I had to have a quarterback back there right now to lead me, who's more emotional and kind of like
good point,
a galvanizer of men than Baker Mayfield? So if something's going on in the community that Baker Mayfield can rally the guys around and just be emotional. I mean, you've seen that since Oklahoma. That's been his deal, because he's never been physically superior to anybody, right? He's just a great leader of his guys, gets everybody on the same page to believe. The problem with that is Saquon Barkley. So Saquon Barkley's on the other side. Yeah. And as of right now, he's been near unstoppable. He had one big drop in a game, and it sort of seems like since then he's been on a mission to kind of – and obviously he's on a new team now, so he's trying to set the tone right out of the gate. This guy can do anything, man. He's as good a dual threat back as you're going to find in the league. I think if it comes down to where he has to just tote the rock over and over, he's built for that, man. He's 230. You can give him the ball 30 times a game. If they can throw it a little bit, he's dangerous there too. Jalen Hurts is a big boy. We know he can get himself a couple yards if he has to. So I'm sorry, my man. I don't know if I'm with you there. I think the Eagles.
You're going Eagles. Hey, I respect that. I respect that, Chris, because I was the same way when you were watching the Eagles and all these players were going down, right? A.J. Brown. Then you saw what happened with Devonta Smith, and you were starting to worry. You're like, man, are they going to have anybody? Sometimes you only need one, right? You only need one workhorse. And if it's Saquon Barkley, you're not worried about it. And of course, Jalen Hurts, he knows what he's doing too. All right, then I want to talk about another thing because you kind of mentioned it. You alluded to it as being a receiver. Oftentimes, you're the guy that's tasked with, hey, do punt returns and do kick returns. And a lot of people say that's the toughest job in sports. So I'm bringing a segment we call Bring the Heat. It's the hot topic, and the hot topic still ends up being the new kickoff rule. Where do you stand on this? What do you feel? What do you think about it?
Well, right out of the gate, from a weather perspective, fielding punts and fielding kickoffs are two extremely different things. Like a kickoff is meant to cut through the wind, come on like a lower trajectory, and it really shouldn't get caught up in the wind if the kicker's doing the right thing. A punt in bad weather is nightmare. It is a nightmare, man. The wind catches it, and that's what the punters are trying to do.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then you got to be able to judge if it's going to turn over or come straight down. So a punt in the bad weather is a nightmare. I'll just tell you that. The new kickoff rule is interesting. I think you made a great point earlier about putting guys back there that you might never expect to be back there fielding kickoffs, because they don't have to worry about quite the same, obstacles that it may have before. Make a guy miss, hit a hole, and get going, because guys aren't building up to full speed no more. I see the Jets up in New York have been kicking around the idea of putting a big receiver, Malachi Corley, who they took early in the draft, just because you want the football in his hands. But he's a big boy who's not your, prototypical small, fast kickoff returner. And yeah, I think that's going to make a lot of changes in that sense. I think about a guy like myself who might not have made any, I might have not been in the league, period, if it wasn't for my ability to run down a ball and hawk a guy on kickoff. So a lot of guys like myself now they take that ability away from me, where I used to run down like a missile for 40, 50 yards and make a couple of guys miss, cut around a wedge and hit a guy. Guys like me might not be perfect for this new thing where I've got to have 5 or 15 yards to kind of build up to top speed and go make a play. So it's an interesting rule.
I don't know, man. I was looking at your stats. You're right. You're solid, all right? So I think you are built, and you got a low center of gravity. I feel like you could still, maybe you're not coming down the field on the defensive side. I think I would put you back there, like you had said, because now you're starting to look at guys where maybe you have that big receiver / running back. That's what we talked with Melvin Gordon in the third about. If you think about the first ever kickoff return for a touchdown in a game this season, DJ Dallas on the Buffalo Bills, they were going against a stiff wind. He's a big dude, and he took 2 guys on at the 40-yard line. He got hit by 2 guys, and he just bounced off them. It was like a ping pong, and it didn't even slow him down. He was like a pinball, and he kept it moving. Now, if you talked about maybe a lighter weight guy, a guy who's, not with that type of intensity and that weight, then maybe he goes down. But you're looking at the evolution of the kickoff. I find it fascinating, and I love it. I think on both sides, it just brings up more strategy to the game. And what you're talking about with the analysis, of course, of the weather impacts. I used to kick. That was my big specialty, actually, was punting and kicking. And when I did that in Florida, that's where I grew up, South Florida, man, it was tough because you get some of those thunderstorms that would flare up. But with it is the wind that comes in, and you're trained as a kicker to kick a spiral because it travels farther and it cuts through the wind. But also times you don't want it to make it easy for you because as a receiver, you're used to catching spirals. So you want to put a little spin and finesse on the ball. There's just so much nuance that comes into this. Chris, I want to ask you something else. This is a bet that I had with Ian. I've lost every week so far. But it's about jersey or no jersey, right? I know there's a big thing, where guys are like, look, you shouldn't be wearing another grown man's name on his back, right? Like, or if it's your jersey, you get a pass. That's kind of how I am. I don't rock the jersey, but he's got plenty of jersey. He rocks the Tom Brady jersey. He's a big Patriots fan. He grew up just outside of Boston. So we are split on this, and everybody so far has been saying, man, you rock the jersey because that shows the love. And I understand that. I just feel like, I don't know. Just for me, it's weird. I just grew up in South Florida. You weren't rocking jerseys. You were tailgating. You were celebrating the Dolphins. And you were talking a bunch of trash, but you weren't rocking the jerseys. Where do you stand on it? There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see what your hot take is.
All right. So I'm a big proponent of, appreciating greatness. Okay. So I have no problem at all, representing a guy who's done it the right way for a long time, whose game I just simply appreciate. At the same time, I got friends who play, and absolutely I'm going to show them love by wearing their name and number on my back. I got a good friend actually in New York who sort of can customize jerseys and tees for me. Oh. So I'm always trying to get one quick. I know I went through a ballers phase where I had the Ricky Jarrett on my back. I'm trying to get those odd, hard to find type jerseys. I'll wear a Steamin' Willie Beeman or a Bobby Boucher. It really depends on where I'm at with stuff. When I was in the middle of Ballers, I was wearing a Spencer Strassmore, which is the Rock's character, or something like that. So yeah, I'm a jersey guy, and I've always been. And I don't I tend to kind of dress down, so it works well for my wardrobe. Yeah.
No, man, you got the swagger to pull it off. Maybe that's the thing. You and Ian's got the swagger to pull it off. I just got to work on that game a little bit, in order to be able to pull off the jersey. Either way, I love it. I think it's interesting to see now, Chris, because there's just so much more movement with the free agency, guys going around. My big problem is we got a friend of the show, Mike Guns. He comes on. He's rocking a Sam Darnold Jets jersey. I'm like, bro, no, take it off. Like, you can't be – I mean, now he's MVP caliber, but if you're going to show love to the Vikings. And I think going back to that point, Sam Darnold was put into action so soon in his career, and it's the New York media. And, it was tough. Now he goes to the Vikings. He's got, time under his belt, and you see what he's able to do when he's got that chance again. He's on a new team, and I just love to see what's happening with Sam Darnold. Is there any stories, because we did some stuff early on in the season where we had Bender's best bets, but it was seasonal, right? And I did my comeback player of the year. He hasn't actually been able to get on the field yet. It was Chubb. I'm thinking out of the Browns. I loving it because I watched him in the offseason squat over 400 pounds, repping it out. It was insane. I think he's got a bionic knee, and I feel like Nick Chubb is what the Browns need right now, and I felt like he's going to be the comeback player of the year. What are you feeling right now? I mean, Aaron Rodgers is tough to root against because he's been so good, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, first of all, Chubb's not human. I've been a huge fan of his since Georgia. I mean, once you see that knee happen in Georgia, I never thought he'd get back.
True.
Then he ended up becoming the best back in the league again. And then the same thing happened. So it's going to be so interesting. And I'm rooting so hard for him to be able to pull it back together. You took the words out of my mouth, man. Aaron Rodgers is a tough one to bet against, because if he's going to get progressively better like he looked last week, to the point where he's doing things he hasn't done in a million years. I mean, he's breaking the pocket, extending plays, and throwing on the run still. I'm going to tell you a little story about myself. So I had an injury that I had to deal with. And I only tell you this because it sort of pertains to Rodgers. When you're 40 years old and you've been playing football your whole life, everything hurts. And you've never had a full year away to rest everything else. So while Aaron Rodgers was nursing that Achilles back, by default, everything else is getting healed. True. So that guy hasn't gotten hit in a year. So he comes back a completely fresh package at 40, rather than a 40-year-old coming off a year getting dinged up last year. So if the Achilles is right, which it seems like it is, and he continues to look like he looked last week. I mean, he's like they said up there, he and Garrett Wilson aren't even on the same page yet. And if we're talking hot takes, man, Devontae doesn't look happy out there. So I'm not even shocked that at the deadline, the Jets don't go out and get another toy for the stretch run. So I think Aaron Rodgers is still the leader in the clubhouse for your comeback player of the year. But if Chubb comes back with the injury he had twice, very hard. I mean, you know what? Damar Hamlin's having a phenomenal year. I don't know if it's too far off of his injury for people to vote him, but first pick of the year last week, and he had a career high in tackles the week before. So let's go out and see if Damar Hamlin has a great year and how he turns out, and see what voters think about that.
Yeah, a lot of people felt like he got robbed last year just by being able to come back and make it in to play football. I mean, it's tough to root against Joe Flacco, though. What he did was incredible. Yeah. So you got a lot of good candidates. I agree with you with Rodgers, though. I mean, resting his entire body, hearing him talk about the love of the game again, being able to be out there for the first time, hearing the national anthem, and just almost coming to tears, realizing this is his happy place, right? You got to root for him, but it's great analysis from, of course, former NFL athlete, sports media analyst for Valuetainment Sports, Chris Manno. Thank you for joining us here on the Storming the Field pod. It was incredible to get your insight and just your energy, man. I love it. I can see why you're training guys right now. They feed off of that, and you're truly doing an incredible job. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. It was a blast, man. Keep crushing it. Hopefully we do it again, my man.
Yeah, definitely. Let's sign it up. All right, and by the way, you can listen to Storming the Field every Friday during the football season, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Plus, you can get the latest on big game forecasts and weather news by watching Fox Weather on your favorite TV device. Also, you can follow us on social media. Mine is @WeatherBender on any different social media. My co-host, who again is covering Major Hurricane Helene. That's Ian Oliver, WX, on any social media. I encourage you to check him out because he's going to have captivating stories from Tampa Bay about the weather. And then every week, he'll be joining me talking about football and weather, the risk of weather impact. Thank you for being with us this week, week 4 on the NFL Week on Storming the Field podcast. We'll see you next time.